Welcome, Lauren. Thanks so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books.
Thanks so much for having me.
I am so excited to discuss Send for Me because this book is gorgeous and heartbreaking and just so great. It's so well written and it was just really, really great. So
Thank
anyway, I
you.
loved it. I
Thanks.
really loved it.
Thanks.
So tell listeners, if you don't mind, a little about Send for Me and what inspired you to write it and what it's about and all the good stuff.
All the good stuff. So short answer is that it is about a family, four generations of women starting in Germany, kind of on the cusp of World War II, and then jumping ahead in time to present day, well, Milwaukee in the 90s. Um, and it's about family separation and kind of the twin traumas of the Holocaust and that family rupture. It's about I guess, I don't know if I think that there's a main character, but I kind of think of Annalise as the main character in the book. And she is, as the Nazis are coming to power in the 1930s, she is able to leave Germany with her husband and young daughter, but she has to leave her parents behind. And the book is kind of partly about her parents desperately trying to leave Germany and how she in Milwaukee is trying to have a life there and trying to bring her parents over. And then the contemporary timeline is about Annalise's granddaughter, Claire, who discovers a stash of letters in her parents' basement that were written by Annalise's mother, Clara, to Annalise as they were trying to leave Germany, and how Claire, the granddaughter, is kind of trying to live her life and trying to figure out how to pry herself away from her history and trying to figure out how to be in the world, knowing her family's intense and traumatic history.
Oh my gosh. And I understand that you actually found the letters. I shouldn't say understand, it's like written in the book, but you found
Yeah.
you found the letters that your grandmother, your well, tell the whole story.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
don't mess it
Sorry,
up.
the other half of the question is what inspired me to write the book, and that is what inspired me to write the book. It is so it's fiction. It's very much fiction. All the characters are, sort of a mishmash of my family, but also just, I mean, I'm a fiction writer. I made them up. So, but the story is my family story. And when I was in my 20s, I found letters in my parents' basement. My grandparents had recently died. They had been living with us for years, and then all of their belongings were in my parents' basement. And I was going through them one day, and I found. I still remember this moment so specifically. It was a little brown box with a pink ribbon around it, and in it were about 75 letters written on this crumbling onion skin paper. They were in German, but they were also in this German script that I can't describe it. It's like knife scratches on paper. It's just like up and down. You can't. It's an old fashioned German script that hardly anyone can still read. So I found these letters, and I just knew, like, this moment stands out for me so vividly in my memory. I just knew that they were going to be important. It was almost kind of magical. I just knew that these letters were kind of going to be like a key to unlock questions that I had had growing up. I knew my family's history because I live in the world and I learned about the Holocaust, but they really didn't talk about it. They were really, I think, trauma affects people in different ways. Some people process and talk about it. And in my family, you know, my family was so tight and so loving and so connected, but they just did not. My grandparents gave me little snippets of information throughout my life. I can count on one hand the number of times they talked about it. So I was able to get these letters translated. It's kind of a process, but I was a graduate student at the University of Minnesota, and I sort of stumbled on a professor who knew how to. He was in the German department, and he had survived the war. He was half Jewish, and he had survived the war in Berlin, passing. So that's a whole other story. But so he took personal interest in my story and helped me translate the letters. So it took us about a year. I would go into his office once a week with a couple of letters, and he would read them out loud into a little tape recorder, and then I would go home and transcribe them. So that is the inspiration for this book. It was really immersive. It was a really immersive project.
Oh my gosh. And then
Yeah.
you wrote in the letter in the book to readers that you tried to write it as memoir and then
Yeah.
waited almost 20 years and now you've come out with it as fiction.
Yes.
What was it like writing it as memoir versus like now I want to read, by the way, the memoir version. I don't
No,
want to read it. Well, maybe
no one
I
will
don't
read
care if
that.
I don't care if it's good or not. I just like I want to know more about your family after reading this. And no, these were the actual letters though, right? That you
Yes.
interspersed.
Yeah.
So how is their story different?
So it's different in so many ways, and it's also like the emotional foundation of the story is the same. Um, this is insignificant, but my grandmother's family owned a butcher shop,
Okay.
and my grandfather was a cattle dealer, so that's how they met. And I, I've been a vegetarian my whole life. I was like, I'm not writing about a butcher shop, so I placed it in a bakery instead. It was much more fun to research, but that's not. I mean, that's not the significant way. The story is different, but fiction writers are, I always say fiction writers are like magpies, just kind of like grabbing objects from, bright, shiny objects wherever they see them. Like, so it's such a weird thing to describe the process of taking a true story and fictionalizing it. Because I felt like, in a world where there is such a thing as Holocaust denial, I felt a very strong obligation to tell this story as this, to tell it truthfully. So I promised myself I would not change a word of the letters. So in the process of reading them, transcribing them, editing them, every word of my great grandmother's in the book in my novel is true. Those are her words. Other than that, like in order to sort of get into my characters' heads, I had to give myself full permission to imagine them. So I mean, um, I guess basically the long and the short of it is the outline of my family story is absolutely true, and then all the details are a combination of true and fiction and research and
Wow.
yeah.
Well, I'm glad you changed it to the bakery because those were some of my favorite scenes. And all the different confections. And I feel like you should, if maybe you've already done this or whatever, but like in conjunction with the launch of your book, you need to make all those things and like
Oh
take.
no, I do not.
You don't?
No, not me.
Okay,
Someone
you need
else.
to source, let me rephrase. You need to find all of those things and like
Yeah.
have them all displayed because now I want to go see what all of those like the different confections that you referred to throughout the book. I want to know what
My
they all look like and
my grandma was a really good baker. My kids are like, Mom, the reason your stuff doesn't turn out is because you're always like, oh, that won't matter. Like I did not inherit her talent.
I know I'm like, well, we don't have buttermilk. Let me just Google and see what I
Oh,
can
you
throw
can
together.
make buttermilk. I've done it.
Yes, I've done it too. I made brownies the other day, and we didn't have any vegetable oil, so I used avocado oil.
See, that's not good. No.
It tasted.
I would
It was.
do the same
My
thing.
kids were like, "Oh, what's wrong with these brownies?" And
You're like, nothing. They're
I'm like,
great.
"Really? You got some extra healthy fat in there? I don't know." Oh my god, they were terrible. I threw them away. Yes, some substitutions do not work, but
Right.
like you, I probably the urge to bake does not come with a lot of forethought. It's just like, let's do it right now with whatever we have. So, yeah.
And that's exacerbated by the pandemic. Like, I'm not going to the grocery store, so we'll just make do with this rancid butter that I just found.
Yeah, totally. We'll just wait for the next delivery of
Exactly.
food from Fresh Direct in a few days. Wow. Well, okay, so fine. You do not have to bake all these things now. I take it
Thanks.
back.
Yeah.
No problem. No problem. Well, what was it like writing this book? Because you're first of all, the words, and I dog-eared all these different sections, just to show like how great you are at even just describing things. Let me find any of my oh gosh, so when you were talking about the heartbreak with Annalise and Max at the very beginning of the book, um, you talked this is just a scene where in a teenage love, a guy decides he doesn't love someone, right? This is like not that big a deal. And yet you write it in such a way. Let me read a couple lines. She's like, 2 days ago, she was a perfect composition of face and limbs and breath and heart. Now she's a rag doll, lumpy, mismatched, stitched together and stuffed with old cloth. And then she keeps going. And you say, this moment is nothing really. So basically, she wanted to touch his hand and he kind of pulled it away. This moment is nothing really. Her heart will mend, even as she can practically feel it cracking. She has an inkling that it will eventually glue itself back together. Maybe it's even starting right now, the delicate process of repair. This is not a devastation like the ones that will follow, nothing like those great, gasping, winged monsters of ruin that will come later, the ones that will try to pick her up in their claws and fling her to her death. It's nothing like those, obviously, but still, years from now, in another country, with her handsome husband, this life irrevocably left behind her, she will remember it, the smell of coffee beans and cigarette smoke, the clink of dishes, and the laughter drifting over from other tables, the sudden rearrangement of their relationship reflected in Max's face. Ah, so good.
Thanks.
Let me find one from later. I probably shouldn't, but uh, well, I don't know why I turned this down. Oh, that was funny about the polar bears. By the way, my daughter has like a fascination with polar bears. Oh, I like when you said, this is much later, but you said, how could you know the heart of your beloved before you married him? Courtship was a confection. I love that line. Courtship was a confection. Crisis brought out the best in people or the very worst. And then you went on to say more, but what a line. I mean, all of these lines, like, anyway, it's funny when I pick up a book from Knopf, I know that it's going to be beautiful, right? Like I know the language is going to be literary and beautiful, and I'm going to like cling to every description of a detail. But this was like just so great.
Thank you.
Anyway, so tell me more about your writing. I keep looking because I kind of want to read another passage, but I can't decide.
And now I just want to sit here and have you read to me from my book. This is weird. It's very satisfying.
Oh, I love this too. Let me just read this one passage. This is also about, so interesting as we talk about like men needing to be strong emotionally and, this whole man up thing that people are finally, rising up against essentially. But this was like ode to the tenderhearted man, which is great as I have some of those in my life. You wrote, Julius knows he is tenderhearted. He comes from a long line of tenderhearted men, fathers who cry when they hold their babies for the first time, who tiptoe into darkened bedrooms just to touch the soft cheeks of their sleeping children, husbands who at times are filled with so much lighthearted gratitude and affection for their tired and faithful wives that they will, without suppression or regret, pull those surprised wives into their arms and hold them for a moment. Sternness is not in his nature. Discipline is not his forte. He has never tried to be something he is not. Beautiful. I mean, you know everything about this man now. It's just like, it's great.
That was easy for me. That was easy because I come from a long line of just that kind of man. My grandpa, my dad, just like really unusual men, I think, of that era. Just so soft and lovely.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So tell me about writing, and you're learning to write like this, and you're writing of this particular book, and just how you craft your sentences and all of that.
So funny because I think about this question, while I'm writing. Of course, every writer is like, how will I capture this in the interview that is yet to come? And in a way, so I think about this all the time. And then also I have no idea. Like there's some weird alchemy that happens. I mean, it's not like it isn't a ton of work and like laborious crafting, but there's also just sort of this like, it's the only time in my life when like time goes by and I don't notice it is when I'm writing, so it's like a weird thing to try to describe the process of writing, which I'm sure so but also, I mean, this story has been living with me for over 2 decades, so I really just gave myself permission and also just was so in the moment of this story, like more so than this is my 4th novel, but more so than any of the previous 3. I was just so immersed in it. And I don't know, the first version of this novel was, as we said, a memoir. And it was composed of lots of really, really short scenes, some of which were like half a page long. And I really gave myself permission to sort of try to craft the sentences. I spent a long time on the sentence level part of the story, and that carried over to the novel. I just really gave myself my last 3 novels are much. I mean, I wouldn't say they're lighter because the last one I wrote is about a woman and the death of her best friend. So it's not like the subjects were lighter, but my writing style was like a little more contemporary and light. And so this one, I just really allowed myself to write it the way I wanted to write it and craft the sentences with as much time. I mean, my last book came out 6 years ago. It took me a long time to write this book. So I don't know if I can describe it
That's
like
okay.
on a more, I don't know if I can, on a more granular level, because in some ways it's just a distant memory.
That's okay. Well, where did you like to write? And did you outline it? How did you structure the story?
I always outline because it gives me this sort of like probably false confidence. But I feel like if I outline up the plot, then at least I know step by step where I'm going. I'm, free to change it, um, but at least I have a map. Um, how, is that? I forgot the first part
That's
of your
okay.
question. How did I
And also
structure?
where did you
Oh, where?
where did you do it? Were you at where you are right now, like at this desk, or were you
Yeah,
somewhere else?
exactly.
Yes.
Right here at this desk, and also just kind of back in the days when my kids were in school, not upstairs in their bedrooms in school. I mean, I had the house to myself from, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. So that was my writing time. And so I could just walk around. I mean, my floors are very clean because I would just sort of Swiffer and think, just wander around the house, pace and walk and think. But this right here is where, in a slightly messier version of what you see, is where I write.
Swiffer as ultimate writing aid. I like that. Ode to the Swiffer. Essay coming next. How old are your kids?
They're 18 and 13, so they're all grown up now, kind of. Kind of.
Kind of. I have a 13-year-old upstairs and, 2 other ones work, also in school, so I get it.
Yeah, that's really fun.
Yeah, really fun.
I mean, they're old enough to do it on their own, but that still sucks.
Yeah. Um, and are you working on anything else now?
Just just Swiffering. No, um, I am not working on anything else right now. I feel like some somebody said writing I think it was Rick Moody who said writing a novel is like burning down your house and you have to rebuild from the ground up. And I don't know. I have a couple of ideas like tumbleweed floating around in my brain, but right now, not much else. This
That's
one
okay.
was such an exorcism for me. Like really, I having spent I mean, because it's my family story and because I sat with it and it lived in my head and my heart for so long, it's really weird right now to feel like what's after this? I have no idea.
That's okay. I mean, so what did your family think about this book? Because it's in part like your whole family story.
Yeah. My brother's just reading it now. Um, and it's just been radio silence on the other end. So I'm eager to hear what he has to say about it. My mom has read it like 3 or 4 times and she'll be like, "Oh, honey, I'm reading it again and I'm crying again." Like she's
Oh,
she's my parents are just like, "Oh, what a great job you did tying your shoe." Like they would just support me no matter what. So and my mom is I think I haven't my mom and I talk all the time, but not so much about this. I think she feels really pleased that I've taken on this project. I think she feels like our family story has been honored in a way by the writing of this novel. I hope she feels that way.
well, it's true. It has. I mean, all these lost stories
Yeah.
as time is going by. I mean, what's great about this book, and I read a lot of Holocaust era stuff. Like I love,
Mhm.
I'm just as most Jewish people do are, and also just readers in general. Like I find this time period, very. I'm drawn to it, and I keep trying to understand it, and I never will.
Right.
Right? I just I'm like, how? Well, it must be different. They must have felt different. And the thing
Mhm.
about this book is you're like, no, 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 nobody felt different at all. Like it was just like as if we were there. And you write about it like, even little things like the objects. There's one part of this book where Annalise is mourning, feeling guilty about it, but even mourning like her chandelier or something like that. Or like, how can she be so, when so much has been lost, how can she mourn the beautiful things that she used to have in her life or a special carpet or anything? And it's like her life before was very much like, lives today. I mean, like
Yeah.
all the details you had. And I think that's one of the things I found that set this book apart is like the detail, the like, you're crawling on your knees feeling the carpet fibers type of detail versus, life was fine when I walked back and forth to the bakery. I mean, that doesn't sound right. I mean, I've read a million
I know what
great
you
other
mean.
books. I'm not trying to say anything. There was just something about how real it felt and how it could so easily be right here, right now, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking a couple things as you're saying that. One is I came back to this book when it came to light that families were being separated at the border and that children were being put in cages. And I was like, oh, this is still so relevant. Like, how is this still so relevant? But you know, the like I think the fact that it's such recent history and we're still trying to, it's a futile attempt to try to figure it out, but that's what this book is, an attempt to sort of, process it. Um, it's still, I mean, the past is still with us, hasn't gone away. And this recent past, I thought a lot about those like physical details because, you know, that's our lives are made up of those like domestic moments, like the lines the lines of the vacuum cleaner as you vacuum your rugs, and the beautiful lamp that you have that has a crack down the middle, or our lives are made up so much of those physical details, and those really weren't any different. I think about that. I did so much research on this time period, and really what it comes down to is it was just our lives without the technology.
Yep. I mean, I think about even the ashtray with the two dogs with their backs
Mhm.
together. Oh my gosh. Like, I feel like now I've seen that. Like, do you know, like I would be like if I saw it in a store, I'd be like, oh, that's that one.
That's the one.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, somebody said fiction writers aren't any more insightful than anyone else. They're just, really good at observing. And I actually feel that way. I'm just like, I'm just looking at stuff and seeing weird things. So that's my writing process.
But there's also this like inherited trauma, which people talk
Mhm.
about, and which, comes obviously from not just Holocaust era survival stories, but from many ways that people have had family members go through things or
Mhm.
pass things down. And it's like when there's something around you, even if it's not spoken about, what does that do to future generations? And here, even when you talk about, now I'm forgetting the name of the granddaughter,
Claire.
Claire,
Yeah.
Claire, Claire, as she like tries to find a boyfriend and like deals with like what it's like when you're going to all these weddings and you're the only one, not getting married, which I don't know. It's very relatable and all of that. How does the fact that she's got all this in her genes, like how, like in her past, how does that affect those daily lives? Does it give her a heaviness that like she's not even aware of necessarily?
I think absolutely. And I think that was I was reluctant to write the present day character because it almost felt weirdly like it almost felt too easy. That part, the inherited trauma, like I feel that, that and it's kind of hard to describe because it's so much like in the air you breathe when you inherit this kind of history. Um, I am so I'm just going to pivot and talk about my personal life because so much of me is in Claire, but I'm like super close to my mom and feel and very strongly feel this obligation to kind of take care of her in a way, just to sort of, I used to joke when I was in my 20s that all I wanted to do was move back to Milwaukee, have a couple babies and just hand them straight over to her. But of course I wasn't joking, and that is what I did. Like there's sort of a feeling when you inherit this kind of rupture that you want to write a new story of your own, and I tried to piece this together for years, like what part of my sort of psychological makeup is whatever, what part is just me and what part is what I was given. I mean, in some ways it's the same for everybody. Like what's the difference between who you are and like who your family is and what they gave you? And I think, maybe that's just intensified for people who inherit a particularly difficult history. But I wondered it for years, like was I just depressed, or was I feeling this sort of like familial generational trauma? I mean, I guess it can be both. I still don't really know. I just think the question is really interesting.
Me too. Um, I feel like it's hard to get around. I mean, it's in there, like
Yeah.
it's just hard to sift out if we use our baker's analogy. Yeah, as we like
Exactly.
turn that little flour thing, right? Anyway, that's as close as I'm getting to baking today.
Thankfully.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for aspiring authors?
Sure. I tell this to whenever I'm asked that question, I have the same answer, and I say it to myself all the time. Look up from your phone, look around, pay attention. I mean, I'm always head down looking at my phone too, like we all are, but I often wonder what the next generation of writing is going to look like. Because I feel like the most important thing to do is to pay attention to the world and just be really just wide open to it, eyes and ears and all senses. So just look up, pay attention, and like I've this book has been a part of me for over 2 decades. There's no like it's a marathon, not a sprint. So just work as much as you can. I don't write every day. I haven't, I would love to say that I do, but I can't and I don't. But just as much as possible, put your butt in the chair and just, even if it's terrible, I mean, often it is, but the writing process is not, it's not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be work, and you have to do it every day. Or well, you don't have to do it every day, but you have to do it as much as you can.
All good advice. Very good.
and read so much. I've heard people say like, I'm a writer, but I don't like to read. Like you can't. You have to read. You have to be a part of the conversation with other writers and other readers. That's like my favorite. I feel like I'll take like an hour during the day and just read and be like, nope, it's my job. I have to.
Yeah.
As you well know.
I do that too. I'm the same way. I'm like, oh yeah, sorry. I'm just gonna, sit here and
It's work.
Yes, work. Do you have a genre you like the most, or types
So
of book?
right now I'm reading a lot of historical fiction just because that's sort of the conversation. Those are the conversations I've been having. And I was never, particularly drawn to it before, but I'm loving it now. But just I love contemporary fiction. I'm so Catholic in my taste. I've like one book in my office, one book in the living room, and one book upstairs. So I'll just read sort of wherever I am and whatever is good.
I'm the same way.
I know you are.
I've now made this into like my like work or whatever, but I've been like this forever, right? There's always a book out
Yeah.
here. And I don't know. It's very comforting to know that like, no matter where you are in your own life, you can escape into someone else's at a moment's notice.
Completely. And you'll never be bored. And like, you can,
bored,
tune
lonely,
everything else out.
forget it. Yeah. So
I know it's a secret. I don't understand why everybody doesn't. You're never bored or lonely. Like, why doesn't everybody know that?
I know.
My kids are like, oh, I don't like to read.
I know. I asked
It's their rebellion.
my son, who's like 6 and is obsessed with the iPad because obviously with COVID,
Right.
That's what happens. And I'm like, you used to like to read last year. And he's like, yeah, but it's not as entertaining. And it kind of broke my heart because I'm like, how can a graphic novel even compete with like the bells and whistles of his video games? But anyway.
Just pretend you don't care. Just act like that's fine. And then I'll be like, well, maybe I should read.
Yeah. Well, now that, I do restrict the time somewhat. So I'm hoping that, I don't know. I don't know about you. I've never wanted to force reading on my kids because I don't want it to seem like one of those things so I never want to be like, now you have to read, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
No, I don't either. I mean, how can you? My kids are like, they don't do anything I say anyways. So that wouldn't go over.
Good point. Very good point. Okay. Well, Lauren, it was great chatting with you. Congratulations on this beautiful novel. And I'm really excited for you. And I'm excited. I hope it finds a home with lots of people because it is quite different, I feel, than the widely written about time period. I feel like this book is different. It really stands apart. So I hope people delve into it and meet your lovely women.
Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Well, have a great day.
Thanks. You too.
Okay. Bye, Lauren.
Bye.